Hi, Christina.
Hi, Anya. Oh, thank you so much. Wow.
So you may want to give people a couple of minutes. Sometimes it takes a moment to get connected to Zoom.
Yes, it does.
Tanisha, do you know if you heard from committee members if they were going to be able to attend or not? I know Molly will not be able to be here.
I have not heard from anybody specifically, no.
Thank you.
I am so terrible about RSVPing. So I apologize in advance, Tanisha. But I'm here.
And we're glad you are.
Sam's on, right?
Yeah, so far I see you and Sam.
Okay.
Sam is here.
Very true point you just made in chat, Sam.
You know, now that I'm home, like I'm home to accept the deliveries, and I just got a delivery. I'm thinking, who ordered this? Of course, my wife ordered it. You know what I mean? Like, it is what it is.
Yes, that's another downside of working from home.
Yeah.
Because I started doing most of my shopping on Amazon, which has limitless supply of things, apparently.
Yeah.
So, because when you go to a store, you kind of look at things to decide whether you need it or not. But it was just kind of like, oh, I kind of need it. And then it arrives and I kind of don't. But it's here anyway.
Yes, it's much easier to do that impulse buying, isn't it?
No kidding. And I've never been good at controlling my impulses as far as shopping is concerned in real stores. So online is super dangerous for me. So Christina, I see we have a few guests. So should we ask folks to write us in the chat who they are and where they're from?
Oh, yes, that's great. If everybody could go ahead and put in the chat your name and, as Anya said, where you're from, who you represent, that would be great. I'm going to do that right now myself.
Thank you. See, I like leading with example.
Oh, did I do it? There.
Nice.
We'll just give it another minute here. I know that Molly's on vacation, and as you said, Anya, she wasn't going to be joining us today, but wasn't sure. I know the closer we get to the holidays later this month, people seem to stop. We seem to have more people drop off on meetings, but
Well, understandable. Hope we'll have a better turnout on Thursday when the full YDC meets.
well, it's 1:06, so I'm thinking it might be a good idea to go ahead and, oh, I see Adrian's joined us. That's great. To go ahead and get started, and hopefully more of our committee members will be able to join us as we get going here. So welcome everyone. My name's Christina McMahon. I'm the Juvenile Director for Clackamas County, and I'm a member of the Youth Development Council. I am just filling in for my colleague, Molly Rogers, who is the Director of the Wasco County Juvenile Department, and she is on vacation. She is the chair of our Juvenile Justice Committee. So she asked me if I would fill in while she's gone, so I agreed to do that. So bear with me today. I'm not usually the one helping run the meeting, so I appreciate your patience in advance. And with that, I think I will go ahead and read the land acknowledgement that we do at the beginning of the meeting. So thank you to Andy Leonard for sharing this with us to be able to use it at our meeting today. I'd like to acknowledge the many tribes and bands who call Oregon their ancestral territory and honor the ongoing relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we now call home. We recognize the continued sovereignty, I never said that word correctly, I apologize, sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and the subsequent bands within those tribes, and thank them for continuing to teach us how we might all be here together. Okay. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I believe I just wanted to say we do need to have a hard stop at 3 p.m. today. I have to get in my vehicle and drive to a meeting in Gladstone. I'm looking at Captain Graves from Milwaukee, one of my colleagues from Clackamas County. So I don't want to speed, so I need to be able to leave right at 3 o'clock. So anyway, with that, why don't we go ahead and get started with our fiscal year 2021 Title II update from Anya.
Thank you, Christina. And Tanisha, would you please put that PowerPoint that we put together on the screen for people to see? So while Tanisha is doing it, quick disclaimer, this is the first time we actually, all of us worked on the same PowerPoint from our homes. So I have absolutely no guarantee that the final result is absolutely tremendous. There might be different fonts that we'll all use, but we try to put everything together for people to see and have a more or less of a record of the meeting, and then we can later put it on our website so folks who missed the meeting can actually see what was discussed on top of the summaries that Tanisha puts together. So that said, Tanisha, if you please move us to the first item on the agenda, which is the next slide. Okay, the formula grants, thank you. So as you know, or maybe you don't, if we have guests in the audience, we have funding that we receive from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention in a shape and the form of a formula grant. Every state and every territory in the nation are eligible to receive Title II formula grants through a population-based formula. However, in order for us to be eligible to receive our funding, we must comply with 33 points of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, which is known as Juvenile Justice Reform Act in its latest reauthorization. There are several conditions that every state and territory needs to meet in order to be eligible for funding. But this is the first time in my memory, and I've been doing this work for about 16, 17 years now. This is the first time ever that the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention put a hold on all funds for fiscal year 21 to all 50 states and all 6 territories. And the explanation for it was that in a process that originated in the Congress that led to multiple audits of the agency, they've discovered several discrepancies in the way states were asked to submit their compliance manuals, in the way the compliance manuals were reviewed, and in the ways determination for eligibility for fundings were made. It's a massive overhaul. Usually we would get an individual response from the office saying, either asking for additional information or feedback saying that you need to resubmit a certain portion of the plan. But this is the first time we're all in the same classroom full of kids who failed the test. So that said, we don't know whether Oregon is failing badly or we're exceeding. So there is no such explanation provided to us. However, what we do know, and I only have here on the screen what was communicated in writing from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. So the commitment that they've made is that by December 15, which is coming up next week, all states will receive a template that aligns with the JJRA requirement. My apologies for using an acronym. JJRA stands for Juvenile Justice Reform Act. Knowing that Ryan Shantz, who was our previous coordinator, was always on compliance monitor, was always on top of his work, and now he's transitioned to provide technical assistance to OJJDP. I'm not super concerned about the status of our compliance manual, but we will know what the requirements are. At this point, we really don't know. So once we receive what this template looks like, Lindsay and I will have a better idea how much work and how many revisions we will need to make. And it's important because we have up to 180 days to resubmit our revised manual. Those of you who have no idea what the compliance manual looks like, I'll tell you it's massive. It's hundreds of pages comprised of different laws and definitions and our monitoring protocols and procedures and how we collect information, how we review information. And a little later, in a few minutes, Lindsay will share with you what she's been working on currently. But again, we don't know how far behind or how far ahead of the curve we are. We'll know more. So the commitment that they're making is that we really don't have to wait until June 13th, 2022, which is a half a year from now. So if the revisions are minor, we will submit as soon as we can. So hopefully, the OJDP will follow on their commitment, which is to review the state's revised compliance monitoring manual and notify us of the eligibility and compliance determination, and subsequently make 2021 awards to states eligible at that time. So that's kind of the update that we have. So there's really a lot of unknowns, but it's a significant portion of the funding that we receive. And typically at this time, we would be receiving a solicitation for the next year funding, but at this point, we don't have even 21. That's really all I have about that, just keeping you updated, because one of the responsibilities of the Youth Development Council is to serve as the state advisory group on juvenile justice and delinquency prevention.
So is that's it for you, Anya, then, and next we can go ahead and move on to Lindsay for compliance monitoring?
There's a hand raised by Sam. Unless he wants to give us an update on his shopping adventure.
Oh, sorry, Sam, I didn't see that. Yes, Sam, go right ahead.
So Anya, so if I heard correctly, DOJ or the feds are holding up the funding. So I guess for me, like, what's the cycle? Like, for instance, like, do you get your funding like in February, then you notify the counties in like March, and then do you send out the funds like in June or July? Like, what's the impact for the funding for the counties?
Well, so this is not a, let me back up a little bit. So the federal funding goes through a strange cycle. When we apply for 21 funds, it's already 21. So we don't usually, if everything was going as scheduled, we would have received the 21 funding in October in 21. And that gives us another 3 years to spend it. We just recently received funding for 19 and 20 because of a series of technical glitches that the office was having with their newly designed and developed justice grants system. So there is no real immediate impact to our sub-grantees because we keep our own sort of cycle, but there is an immediate impact for the money that we would use to pay for positions such as compliance monitoring. But again, since we just recently received our 19 and 20 funds, we're in good shape. However, in states where they rely on this funding alone, who don't have a general fund like we do with juvenile crime prevention, then the impact is significant to the field. But normally, we would have received the letter of determination whether we're eligible for funding and for how much sometime in September at the latest, and usually award will start as of October 1, which is the fiscal year. I hope that answers. So we're not in a dire straight situation just because we have some previous year funding to use and also general fund.
Okay, so does that mean like so there also potentially there could be a year where there's 2 years of funding then, correct?
That's possible too.
Wow.
Everything is possible.
Okay. Yeah, because
Nothing is certain. It says like this: everything is possible, but nothing is certain. Does it make sense? If it doesn't, my apologies. I didn't.
Yeah.
I'm not quite in charge of this logic. But we will do what we can, and hopefully if the funding is delayed, we will receive some kind of extensions if needed.
Okay.
Sorry. Christina, sorry I interrupted you. I saw Sam's hand.
Oh, no, I'm glad you interrupted. I have a hard time tracking everything on especially those small boxes. So Lindsay, I think it's your turn to talk about compliance monitoring.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Lindsay. For those of you who don't know, I'm in the new compliance monitoring role the last couple months. Tanisha, if you can change to my slide, I'll just update you guys on a little bit of what I've been working on. I think it was, okay, there we go. 38, we've done 38 on-site inspections this year. I didn't include the virtual in this count because they don't count with the feds. So most recently, as of last week, we were able to get Albany, Lebanon, Staten, and Sweet Home Police Departments inspected. Lane County Sheriff's Office and Springfield is scheduled for 12/20. I did reach out to the juvenile department out there, see if I could get them on the same day, but I have yet to hear back. So fingers crossed I can add that, add them to the list. The FY or fiscal year 21 declaration forms, I'm still working on gathering those. I have about 42 facilities left, and that's just to reach the 85% goal from OJJDP. Anya talked a little bit about the funding. That 85% is to stay in compliance for the funds. So I'm waiting data from the Oregon Youth Authority still. And I'm still going through the custody logs. Each facility is pretty different on how they record things. So sometimes I have trouble reading the writing or something's missing. So there's a lot of legwork involved, going back and forth, but I've only found one violation so far at a facility. I've talked to Robbie on the phone a couple times. He's very nice. It's good to see you here. I did attend the OJJDP SHRAD conference. That was November 8th through the 10th. They gave some updates on guidance for section 223A11B. So it's just the JJDPA requirements and monitoring of court holding facilities that now falls under the definition of adult jails or lockups. That's going to start on 12/21 of this year. So about 2 weeks. The JJDP Act will require that a juvenile who is charged as an adult cannot be detained in an adult jail or lockup or have sight or sound contact with adult inmates unless the court has found that it would be in the interest of the justice to do so. There is a form that they have to go through and check. It needs to be completed for each instance in which a juvenile is charged as an adult and detained in an adult jail or lockup while awaiting trial or other legal process. I have a copy of the form. If anybody wants to see it, let me know. I can email it to you later. And you could take a peek at it. I didn't add it in this slideshow today. Next slide, please, Tanisha. I was trying to do it on my own. I'm used to working the, the keys on the slide. So some of the considerations that the court has to think about before placing a juvenile in a jail if they are charged as an adult is the age of the juvenile, the physical and mental maturity of the juvenile, the present mental state of the juvenile, including whether the juvenile presents an imminent risk of harm to the juvenile, the nature and circumstances of the alleged offense, the juvenile's history of prior delinquent acts, the relative ability of the available adult and juvenile detention facilities to not only meet the specific needs of the juvenile, but also to protect the safety of the public as well as other detained youth, and any other relevant factors. Next slide, please. If the court determines that it is in the interest of the justice to detain a juvenile who is charged as an adult in an adult jail or lockup or have sight or sound contact with adult inmates, the court must hold a hearing at least every 30 days, at least every 45 days in a rural jurisdiction to review whether it is still in the interest of justice to continue to detain the juvenile in an adult jail or lockup, or that they had contact with adult inmates. Under this new requirement, the maximum amount of time that a juvenile charged as an adult may be detained in an adult jail or lockup or have sight or sound contact with adult inmates is 180 days. And that 180-day limit may be extended if the court determines in writing that there is a good cause for such an extension, or if the juvenile expressly waives this limitation. States must begin monitoring and collecting data for the interest of the justice starting on 12/21 of this year for the fiscal year 2022 data, which will be used to determine eligibility and compliance for the fiscal year 23 Title II awards. So that's going to be some more data I'll be bugging some of you for very soon. And that will conclude my update for compliance monitoring. Thank you.
Great. Does anyone have any questions for Lindsay? No? Okay, thank you. Great job, Lindsay. Appreciate it. Okay, so Anya, it's back to you for the fiscal year 20 PREA award, basic rights, Oregon training for detention managers.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Lindsay, for doing your bit, and thank you, Tanisha, for moving the slide even without me asking. So see, it's a teamwork here. So for those of you who don't know what PREA stands for, it stands for Prison Rape Elimination Act. How it's connected to Title II funding, that's a really good question, but it is. After PREA law passed, which was several years ago, in some ways, since it comes from Department of Justice, they connected the award amount we receive under Title II, and Title II is what Lindsay and I were talking about prior, some issues that we're having with 21 and new eligibility requirements for the next fiscal years. For the fiscal year 2020, Oregon Title II allocation was reduced because state of Oregon was out of compliance with PREA. The reason state of Oregon was out of compliance with PREA was because of not anything that Oregon did wrong. It was because Oregon Youth Authority doesn't have capacity to provide staff to use ratio required under PREA standards. That said, that the Title II allocation was reduced, but we received a separate award called fiscal year 2020 PREA grant that we needed to use for PREA related purposes. So what we did, and it's not a huge amount of money, it was about $18,000 a few $100 award, which we decided as an agency and also as a group to use to support the work that was started by in the development of the Oregon Juvenile Detention Guidelines. When what we left kind of unfinished there was specific provisions for working with LGBTQ plus youth. So we made a decision to give a grant to Basic Rights Oregon to continue with the work to make sure that LGBTQ plus youth are supported in juvenile detention facilities. And I'm very happy to report that it was a successful undertaking. So there was a work group that was formed, and there were several juvenile directors involved and detention managers. So we went through a thoughtful process working with Basic Rights Oregon on identifying the needs of detention facilities and how they could tailor, if you will, the standard LGBTQ plus training that they usually do to the needs of the juvenile justice field and specifically detention staff. So we did, the training happened on November 9th, 2021, with most detention facilities in attendance. The room space was limited. Well, it was obviously online, but also we had to cap it at the request of Basic Rights Oregon to allow for interaction and meaningful participation. We also couldn't record the training because it contained some sensitive information and people were allowed safe space to share their concerns. As after the training, we also got a final report from Basic Rights Oregon that outlines the next steps that we should consider taking in order to improve our services delivery to LGBTQ plus youth. And our next step would be getting some policies in a way like a template policy that we can add to the juvenile detention guidelines so facilities can use, and that will help them determine their own policies and protocols and procedures. So that's what I wanted to share with you, because that was a successful event. So the feedback we received from detention managers, and we shared this at the Juvenile Directors Association meeting, that seems to be well received. And hopefully we will be able to continue with this work. There's no word about fiscal year 2021 PREA awards. You can probably imagine that, since they don't even know what to expect for Title II. So my question, when I asked it whether we will be, what's the timeline and what's the approximate estimation of when we might be even getting a notification of PREA awards, I was asked to hold my question for later. So, but we do have some funding in fiscal year 18 in juvenile justice system improvement. So we might be able to dedicate some of it to continue working with Basic Rights Oregon and get to the next level of policy development and more customized training. That's my update on PREA grant award. Are there any questions? I don't see everybody because the way my screen is set up. So if you have a raised arm, I don't see it. So speak up if you have a question.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you, Anya, for helping bring that training to the detention managers. There was a lot of feedback when you talked about this at the juvenile director's recent meeting, and people were very appreciative to get this training. It's very important in an area a lot of county juvenile departments know they need to do better in. So thank you.
Appreciate. Thank you, Christina. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any questions, so we'll go ahead and move on to the juvenile crime prevention statutes and administrative rules. So that, I guess we're going to go ahead and kick that off to you, Anya.
Okay, thank you, Christina. So now we're going to switch gears. Up until now, we talked about our federal funding and federal responsibilities as a state advisory group. Now we're moving to our responsibilities as an entity providing both administration for YDD, but for Youth Development Council, the policy guidance for juvenile crime prevention funds, the general fund. It's a slightly, well, I shouldn't say whether it's confusing, but it's slightly different from usual responsibilities of the Youth Development Council. That's why in statute they are called other duties of the council, which everything that's related to juvenile crime prevention. The reason I brought up these statutes here, and it's just very briefly, is that at the last Juvenile Justice Committee meeting, we had a conversation about what is the extent of Youth Development Division as well as Youth Development Council authority in regards to juvenile crime prevention plans, funding, and so forth. You may recall that we've communicated to several counties that their juvenile crime prevention plans were accepted with conditions or provisions that they would receive technical assistance from us, specifically for the sections of the plans that had some questions about racial and ethnic disparities and so forth. And later today in our agenda, we will have an in-depth conversation about that. But we followed with the committee's request, and this is what we found. So and you can see the numbers of ORSs here, and there's a lot more information on each one of them. I just pulled out what's pertaining to the process specifically. So the Youth Development Council provides funds to counties and tribes for programs based on youth at risk for juvenile crime and establishes assessment criteria for the high-risk juvenile crime prevention plans. That's important. Those criteria is how we provide, draw conclusions whether the plans are up to the standards or not. And the criteria include, but are not limited to, measuring changes in juvenile crime and recidivism. So measuring juvenile crime and recidivism are statutory required. Where the council and the division review the budget and allocation formula for appropriations of the purpose of juvenile crime prevention, and review the components of local high-risk juvenile crime prevention plans developed under the next ORS. So far, when the reference to establishing assessment criteria, this is when we develop planning guidelines that we consequently share with the counties and the tribes. And in response to the guidelines that we share with them, they send us their juvenile crime prevention plans. So next, the next ORS is describing the process that local communities have to go through and engage in order to put together the juvenile crime prevention plan, which will be subsequently submitted to us. So it's fairly specific. So each Board of County Commissioners designates a state agent, or I shouldn't say state agents, my bad, an agency or organization to serve as the lead planning organization to facilitate the creation of a partnership among state and local public and private entities in each county. And then that partnership in turn shall develop a local high-risk juvenile crime prevention plan. So it's in statute already that it's a planning process. That's why we cannot treat it as just a grant proposal. There are certain required components that go in the planning. And it's required not by agency, not by council, but by Oregon law. The Youth Development Council then shall award a minimum grant to small counties. And that's when we had this conversation about what would be the minimum grant level be. And since there was an increase in overall funding that the legislature assigned to or allocated to JCP, we were able to increase the minimum grant in this current biennium. And the lead agency is required to submit the JCP plan in accordance with the JCP planning guidelines. Now we're going back to the guidelines, and that's what people followed when we asked them to follow the guidelines for submission of the plan. And another thing, we also had to see a statement of Local Public Safety Coordinating Council, that's the LPSC is the abbreviation for that, or county governing bodies approval of submitted plan. So it's a serious process that each county has to engage in order to submit the plan to us. So those are the statutory requirements. Now, we also have rules that were adopted to help us administer the funding. And out of that, section number D, and you can always look up, and there's links in every one of them to the actual language of the statutes and the rules. A designated agency or organization shall submit the juvenile crime prevention plan in the form and manner required by the division to the division, which is when we shared the guidelines in the form of JCP plan submission form. So that was the division fulfilled its obligation. Division shall submit the juvenile crime prevention plan to the Youth Development Council for approval, which we also did. This is when the Juvenile Justice Committee went through the review. We had smart sheets, we all communicated, based on what's, the review, we've come to certain conclusions. Now, the council, in this discretion, may approve the juvenile crime prevention plan or require the plan to be resubmitted. The council may require juvenile crime prevention plan to be resubmitted as many times as the council deems necessary to assure that the plan is developed in accordance with this rule. What I don't have here is that also a county or tribe can resubmit the plan at any time. And in the past, we've had multiple occasions when a county or a tribe will need some changes to be made to the plan. Because see, the planning process happens before the biennium starts. So things change. So it allows for a flexibility. So if you need to, you submitted one plan, it was approved, but you need to make changes, which is totally fine. You just need to resubmit it, say, well, and these are the changes we're proposing, and the council in turn will approve or not. So this is the kind of the fundamental bit of it. So Lindsay, if you don't, I'm sorry, see, Lindsay, I'm so used to relying on you. I'm always relying on you. Tanisha, if you don't mind, could you please move? So that said, we've reviewed the statute, and nowhere in the statute or in the rule it says that YDD or YDC, for that matter, have the authority to require anything. So we can ask for a plan to be resubmitted, but we cannot impose, we cannot hold back funds, we cannot require acceptance of technical assistance, none of it. So it has to be a back and forth communication. So after we've reviewed the statutes and the rules, Brian Detman, who's the director of the YDD, who couldn't be here today, and I had a conversation with the Juvenile Directors Association, and I have November 18th here, but the actual conversation was happening on November 17th. On November 18th, I followed up with an email which pretty much reiterated what was stated by Brian at that meeting, and to provide both a follow-up to what was discussed, but also to have a written communication with those who were not able to be at that meeting. In a nutshell, this is what it says. So we understand that it's not within our authority to withhold funding or require acceptance. We are, however, committed to providing counties and tribes an opportunity to resubmit plans, which is clearly within our statute and our agency rules. So this is the step with counties which conditional and provisional plans approval, and others, including counties and tribes with approved plan, can pursue at any point. So if anybody wants to make any changes to the plan, that's within your, and by your, I know we'll have several guests, but addressing the guests at this point. So if you feel the need to resubmit your plan, you may do it at any given time, but it will still have to be approved by the YDC. Now, next bullet here is resubmitting a plan can be in lieu of technical assistance. However, we strongly recommend taking advantage of the technical assistance. And by what we have so far planned, and Sanjay will share with you in bigger kind of level of detail what we're envisioning and offering for your review, is so far, we suggested you attend the upcoming JJ's RRI, Juvenile Justice Information System, Relative Rate Index data training on how to understand and utilize annual county racial and ethnic disparities reports. It's also kind of, I will take a moment to talk about it for a second, and I think we got the date finalized just this morning. Sanjay will tell you more about it. So if you know, if you don't know, I will just assume, or I'll just say it. If it's old news to you, great. If it's something not interesting, then bear with me either way. So Juvenile Justice Information System publishes annually reports for each individual county on the ethnic and racial disparities within each county using the relative rate index methodology to generate that report. Now, they've been around for, Christina, help me if I'm, at least last 3 years.
The published reports have been around for approximately 4 years.
4 years, thank you. Well, prior to that, that methodology was used by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention to monitor progress on implementation of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act that requires addressing disparities in juvenile justice systems. Oregon, to my knowledge, is the only state that publishes such reports annually, and they're widely available not only to the counties for which those reports are developed, but also for general public. And it's a tremendous information source for everyone. However, do we really know how to use it? Because and again, Christina, I'll be relying on you to correct me if I'm off base and completely wrong. But to my knowledge, there hasn't been really a training opportunity associated with how to read these reports. They're kind of being published and left there for viewing. So that's why I was super excited that we worked with Mark Greenwald and Doug Thomas to bring that training to anybody who's willing to participate. Super excited about that. And then there will be an opportunity to meet and greet with Sanjay, and there are some other technical opportunities under development. Again, Sanjay will talk some about this. And we committed that we are developing clearer guidelines for plan submissions and including an evaluation framework for the equity, disparity, and cultural strategies question. And just to say, we take it as an opportunity to learn how we can improve those both planning and reviewing process better for the next funding cycle. Fully admit that we could have done better, we should have done better, and technical assistance really needs to be provided in the planning process, not after the planning process has completed. So that said, all bear with us, but at least we will be here to assist you every step of the way, if we can. And lastly, we're committed to sharing feedback on the plans with those who were interested. I'll just let you know that I met with five counties over the last couple of weeks. And we went through the plans and we had honest conversations about what was lacking in the plan and what could have been better, and overall, and I'll just speak for myself based on what I heard from folks, everybody wants to do better. It's a given. So let us just work on it together and see how we support each other in our work. So I think this is all I have prepared as far as the PowerPoint goes, but I'm happy to answer any questions or provide any more clarity that I can.
That was a really helpful walkthrough, Anya. I just want to point out, it isn't listed. Obviously, this doesn't go over all the plan components, but your discussion earlier about the LGBTQ plus training that was done for detention managers, that technical assistance, the plan, the guidelines for the plans did also require that counties respond to how, I don't remember the exact verbiage, but it was something related to how we are supporting and providing responsive services to LGBTQ youth. So that's a way that the counties have benefited from technical assistance. So I see that as analogous to what you're now doing with the RRI JGIS reports. We, as you already pointed out, yes, the JGIS reports are published and they're out there, but we have never held as a system any kind of training on what they mean, what they don't mean, what they do convey, what they don't convey, how to look at them and know what area you might want to focus on or areas that you need to focus on, et cetera. So I think that's really helpful, and appreciate that you're bringing in Mark and Doug, who are very, both work at the Oregon Youth Authority, but come from other places around the country and have a great deal of expertise. So I really appreciate that that's going to be happening.
Thank you, Christina. And yeah, you're absolutely right. We should add an opportunity for technical assistance for how services for LGBTQ plus youth can be delivered and improved.
Yeah. Did anyone have any questions about any of the statutes or the administrative rules or the message that went to the JCP lead agencies? Anyone? No? Okay. So let's see. So Anya, you're done covering that for now then, correct?
Yes, yeah. So Sanjay will be sharing with you our more specific technical assistance proposal. Thank you all.
Good afternoon. My name is Sanjay Moore. I'm the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Coordinator for the Youth Development Division. Thank you all for the opportunity to have this continuing conversation. It's been quite an eventful roller coaster of occurrences. And I think, as was stated many times in the past, this is a learning opportunity and presents the opportunity for growth, in addition to for our agency. So based on the information that Anya just shared with you, there have been some updates since our last meeting in November to the technical assistance process. Of course, the biggest one is that it is no longer a quote unquote requirement. It is now optional. And so we will be extending that opportunity to interested county juvenile departments. Next slide, please. First, to review the applicable submission section and prompt that got us here. Within the Juvenile Crime Prevention Plan solicitation, question 6 was a section titled Evidence-Based Practice and Cultural Appropriateness, and one bullet point asked for a description of cultural strategies, including racial and ethnic disparities identified in your data analysis and inclusion. Next slide, please. So there has been a lot of conversation about how the evaluation was derived for the racial and ethnic disparities prompt. And these scores were placed in the smart sheet that Anya previously referenced, and also were going to be shared with the counties in the initial meet and greet. But I know there was a lot of anticipation and everybody wanted to know in advance what their score was and why and how that score was derived. And so with the delays, our apologies, we were not able to provide that in advance. But to give insight into how those scores were derived, the scoring categories were exceptional, satisfactory, needs improvement, unsatisfactory, and unclear. To explain what each of these scores correspond to, exceptional would be a response that was outstanding, and it addressed all the components of the prompt that I just shared with you in an excellent manner and demonstrated clear, concise, and thorough knowledge and understanding of the subject matter. There were 7 counties who received the score of exceptional. Satisfactory, would be an adequate response, and it would address the prompt in an adequate manner and demonstrate average knowledge and ability with minimal to no apparent deficiencies noted. 6 counties received satisfactory. Needs improvement would be a fair response, and it would minimally address the prompt, but not demonstrate sufficient knowledge of the subject matter. 16 counties received needs improvement, and sequentially were counties that were given conditional approval. Unsatisfactory would be an insufficient response. This isn't a response that would be unacceptable and did not address the prompt that was set forth, and a response that did not demonstrate knowledge of the subject matter. 7 counties received unsatisfactory and subsequently received the provisional approval. Unclear would have been a response that would not have been able to be evaluated. There were no counties that fell into this category. Next slide, please. As Anya stated, and in the previous presentations about the framework of this technical assistance process, it was my recommendation that we really focus in on one of the cornerstones of this work, which is data identification and analysis of racial and ethnic disparities. And in that process, we've talked about a data walk, which is hopefully something that is still in the works for next year. But in conversations, we knew that because of the current status with the COVID-19 pandemic, fully planning a data walk that would conceptualize the vision of what we would hope to accomplish in it would have been a little more challenging. So the idea was posed to have an initial overview training with JJUS to kind of just address some of the very simple areas of understanding these relative rate index racial and ethnic disparities reports. And so Anya shared with you, an overview of what that training will entail. I will share a little more. It is just our hope that we will give basic background knowledge, and we, meaning the experts, as has been pointed out, Doug Thomas and Mark Greenwald with the Juvenile Justice Information System and Oregon Youth Authority. They and their team will give an overview of how the racial and relative rate index, racial and ethnic disparities reports are curated, how to understand and interpret the components of the report, how to look deeper, because one of the conversations that was consistent in some of the plans is that our data doesn't indicate the ability to analyze disparities because of the demographic and our population. And on the JJUS reports, if you look at the racial and ethnic disparities report, in many instances, you will see an asterisk, which means that the number pool of a certain race or ethnicity was not high enough to be statistically significant. That was a tongue twister. But what Mark and Doug will help many counties understand is that they can look beyond that asterisk and delve deeper into analyzing if disparities exist, and they will provide tools and information that will help them do so. In addition to the training, before the training, we hope to share a kind of information pre-homework assignment for everyone to kind of study and look over in the form of a document that will be a written form of things that may be anticipated in the training, so that in advance of the training, the counties or anyone participating can formulate any questions, clarities, or things that they would like more information on in the question and answer portion of that JJUS training. So we sent out a poll based on Mark and Doug's availability, and thank you to Tanasia for distributing that to determine the best date and time of the training. Based on that poll, we concluded, and Mark and Doug have confirmed that the training will be hosted virtually on Friday, December 19th from 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. You can put a soft pencil on your calendar for that. More details will be shared in the coming days with communication about how to access the training, the document that I just referenced, and so forth. Before I move forward, I see a private message. I will respond to that after my presentation. Before I move forward, I would just like to see if there are any questions so far. Hearing none. Tanasia, next slide, please. And I do apologize. I know I may sound nasally or stuffled, but I have a mask on because I am in a public location. So please forgive any awkwardness in my voice. So there has been an intense conversation about sharing with the counties what criteria would need to be met in order to, for lack of better words, pass the resubmission. And I don't think that that's the best choice of words, but to kind of have an adequate submission and description of the work that a county is doing or would like to do as it relates to cultural strategies and racial and ethnic disparities. I formulated some recommendations, and also Brian, Anya, and myself had some intensive discussion about what that would look like. And so based on the conversation and my recommendations, our director, Brian Deckman, drafted a resubmission somewhat checklist or criteria that we would like to propose to you for us to, in the meet and greet, which I will discuss a little bit later, share with the, and likely this will go out actually before the meet and greet. I retract that last statement. I will discuss in a future slide how I will be communicating with the counties, and all of this information will be in that communication. So again, question 6 was asked under the subheading of evidence-based practice and cultural appropriateness, and for a description of cultural strategies, including addressing racial and ethnic disparities identified in your data analysis and inclusion. So we propose to break this question down into 3 overarching components, pretty cut and dry from the prompt. Identify and analyze racial and ethnic disparities in local data, describe your cultural strategies, and explain how you achieve an inclusive race, ethnicity, language, gender, sexual orientation, geography, etc. Juvenile Services Department. And I will be going over each of these overarching components in separate slides. And we also have developed guiding questions that have been added to help the county juvenile department have clearer insight into what the responses should include and how the resubmissions will be evaluated. And I will, again, later in this presentation, share that reevaluation criteria. A point system is recommended. And because one of the conversations that I was having with Brian and Anya is that in my evaluation of those plans initially this summer, it's like a gray area between objective and subjective in trying to decide which county truly met the call of the question and which county did not. And so there were some clear hard lines between counties that, for instance, got exceptional and satisfactory, but potentially blurred lines between satisfactory needs improvement and also needs improvement and unsatisfactory. So I said, maybe we should come up with some type of truly objective point system so that there can be less ambiguity about how a resubmission will be evaluated. And so we have derived that for a recommendation, and they will correspond with each of the above overarching components. And also, we will provide resources that will be included in that resubmission criteria, as well as this opportunity for counties to take advantage of the technical assistance. Next slide, please. So looking at component 1, this is the full potential draft of the resubmission criteria, asking the county juvenile department to identify and analyze any racial and ethnic disparities in local data, at minimum using the Juvenile Justice and Information System Racial and Ethnic Disparities report for your county. And there will be a link provided for them to access those reports. If this isn't explained in another section of your plan, please summarize in this section and or refer to the pages where this information can be found. One, not major problem, but it happened in a few instances where there was debate about if the county addressed prompt 6, bullet point 1 in a different component of their plan submission. And so personally, I feel like the response to that section should be in that section. So that's where that clarifying language would come, to ask them to please replace it there in the appropriate section. So these are the guiding questions that were developed to kind of give some insight into how a county might frame their answer. And these are not quote unquote requirements. Again, they're just to provide some assistance if counties are having difficulty in trying to answer and description of their racial and ethnic disparities, data analysis, their cultural strategies, or their inclusive practices. So for this component, the guiding questions are there racial and ethnic disparities in your jurisdiction, county, or tribe? And what race or ethnic groups have disparate outcomes? What are the decision points where you see disparities? And in the introduction to this criteria, the decision points that we are referring to will be laid out. The next guiding question is, do you have programs and services that are designed to meet the needs of youth experiencing where the disparities are present and persisting? And finally, the last guiding question for this component, are the number of Black, Hispanic, and or Native American youth, or the disparities in these categories, statistically significant? That phrase is going to make me become an expert public speaker. How does statistical significance or insignificance impact your programs, services, supports, practices, and or hiring and staffing? Before we move on to the next question, I will ask if there is any conversation or discussion about this component.
Hi, Sanji. It's Parasa.
Hi.
Is that okay to ask a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. First off, I really appreciate seeing the different guiding questions being outlined here. I guess one wondering I have is, how are we defining statistically significant, or is that something that's going to be further discussed in the training that folks will have access to? Because I'm not a data analysis expert in any way, and so I just want to make sure folks have support and are clear on the different definitions and terms and how to really operationalize this.
That's an excellent question, Parasa. Thank you. And I think that it presents the opportunity to make sure that we define that. I am definitely not a statistician nor anywhere near an expert in this area. I wish my colleague Bill Hansel was here, because he and I have had intense conversations about using the term significant in reference to data, and he has corrected me on many times. But I think that that presents an opportunity for us to ask Mark and Doug to address that, and also for that to be in the introductory document, so that it is clear that there won't be any confusion about what statistical significance means. And I'm putting a note in the chat so that I can have that for reference. And as a note to self moving forward, please forgive any spelling errors with that. Sam, I see your hand. How are you?
Hi, everybody. Doing good. Thank you for allowing me to ask my questions. So, and because everyone knows I'm not that smart of a guy, so I have to ask a lot of questions. So, if I heard correctly, now the training is now optional. It's no longer mandatory, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then now counties have an opportunity to resubmit their plans to perhaps complete like section 6 or certain sections that needed to be improved, correct?
Yes. Well, this process, please, Anya, Christina, anyone correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this process of resubmission requests are specifically for the prompt regarding cultural strategies and racial and ethnic disparities data analysis. But as Anya stated, a county can submit or resubmit their plan for any reason at any time. But I believe that the counties who received needs improvement or unsatisfactory are being requested to resubmit their plan so that they can improve their response for that component of the JCP plan.
That is correct.
And what if a county chooses not to resubmit?
And we'll deal with that situation if it arises, but so far I have not heard one response saying we're not going to work with you. So we will continue negotiating. I don't know, Sam. It has not been described in statute or in rule what happens if they refuse.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your clarification. And then I'm just wondering because sometimes, and I do it myself too, sometimes like when I have like an application or like a form that has a lot of components, like sometimes like I may pay attention to components like 2, 3, 4, but kind of like not concentrate on 4, 5, 6. And then sometimes counties may have done that, not intentionally, but they may have decided to, pay more attention or devote more of their energies on certain criteria. But then now I think by having this process for this, counties are now aware that, this is also one of the critical components or sections.
Thank you, Sam. And I agree. I think that in a submission for state funding, all of the sections are critical and the same amount of effort should be put into every component of the submission. I see a question from Ms. Jody, or I don't want to assume gender, from Jody Merritt, asking counties that choose to resubmit will be evaluated differently than original applications. Is that what this criteria identifies? And actually, Jody, thank you for your question. Technically, you are not being evaluated differently. We are acknowledging that this should have been done prior to the call for submissions. And so we're kind of backtracking and helping you to understand what we are evaluating your submission on in reference to this prompt, and giving you more information about what would indicate an adequate or above answer, because we now have observed that some of the responses potentially could have been because there was not enough information about what type of response would be sufficient in order to address the question. So the evaluation criteria, with the exception of the points, Jody, that's the only thing that is going to be a little bit slightly different, is that each of these components will now, if it is approved, we're proposing that there will be the attachment of a point system so that it can be very objective in how a county received exceptional, satisfactory, needs improvement, unsatisfactory. I hope that that answers your question. Thank you. Are there any additional comments or questions before we move on to the next component? Hearing none. Tanasia, next slide, please. So looking at component 2, which is the part of the question that asks the county juvenile department to describe their cultural strategies. And Parsa, like the last component where we didn't necessarily take it upon ourselves to define statistically significant, we did go ahead and define what cultural strategies are. And so this is a definition that Brian drafted, and it uses, I am sure, research based on common practice. And it defines cultural strategies as services, programs, practices, supports, and staffing, as well as training and professional development that are culturally and/or linguistically relevant, specific, and responsive. Examples include staff and/or volunteers with lived experiences and/or identify with the same racial, ethnic, immigrant background as youth they serve, or practices such as seat lodges, talking, healing circles, restorative dialogues and relationships, affinity groups, youth from specific racial and ethnic backgrounds meeting together in a shared or safe space, potentially also including multicultural gatherings, and finally partnerships and/or contracts and subcontracts with community-based groups, organizations, and/or churches who represent the racial, ethnic, immigrant, refugee community and families of the youth. So this is not an exclusive list, but some examples of cultural strategies. And the guiding question that were developed for this component of the prompt include: what cultural strategies are you implementing in your jurisdiction? Explain the goals of these cultural strategies. And finally, what trainings or professional development opportunities related to cultural strategies and racial and ethnic disparities will be offered in the 2 years of this plan? If no trainings are planned, how can the Youth Development Division help in this area? Are there any questions or comments regarding this component for cultural strategies? Hearing none, I will move to the next slide, please. And finally, component 3, which addresses the prompt. You're welcome, Parsa. Thank you for that sentiment. Looking at component 3, which is basically just the word inclusion. So now we have kind of expounded on that a little bit and asked the county juvenile department to explain how you achieve an inclusive juvenile services department. And inclusive could relate to race, ethnicity, language, gender, sexual orientation, geography, etc. And the guiding questions that we derived for this component include: do you have any connections or relationships with communities of color or organizations and individuals from those communities? Please describe. How does gender, geography, or address and language impact disparities and/or services for youth from non-majority racial and ethnic backgrounds, and those where a language other than English is their native language or the language spoken at home? And finally, if not answered in an earlier section, how were youth, particularly those impacted by racial and ethnic disparities, community members, system partners, not to exclude, but including child welfare, law enforcement, education, the defense bar, health, human services, etc., included and engaged in the development and approval of your juvenile crime prevention plan? If this is explained in another section of your plan, please summarize in this section and/or refer to the pages where this information can be found. So these are the proposed criteria that we would like to share with the counties for their information as they begin to draft their resubmissions. Next slide, please. We will also share resources, and these are not exhaustive, but some of them I thought would be helpful. Included the new roadmap that was published by the state of Oregon, released from the governor's office, for the state of Oregon's diversity, equity, and inclusion action plan. And it's an amazing document. It has a wealth of information. State of Oregon racial justice resources, a racial equity toolkit from the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, also known as GARE, the Racial Equity Impact Assessment Tool developed by Race Forward, Results-Based Accountability Implementation Guide, and also the JJS and YDD data training, recording, and resources. So these will be hyperlinks so that the county can click on them and access this information. And we don't have 100% confirmation that the JJS training on the relative rate index, racial and ethnic disparities data will be able to be recorded, but we hope that that will be the case.
Looks like Parasa's got a question.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Go ahead, Parasa.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina. And Sanji, I appreciate the additional overview you provided. And a wondering that I have is, based on what folks share in response to this resubmission, I wonder if there are any like helpful resources that any of the juvenile departments name that could be helpful to kind of share across the state or with other departments. Maybe there's a way in which the YDD can kind of be a connector of sorts, so that folks aren't working in isolation. There's a lot of ways in which we can build on the resources that folks have developed in their community too. So I don't know if that's something that's realistic to do right now, but maybe that's something we think about over time of, you know, how do we build that repository of resources, right? Beyond state, beyond national, but something that's really locally specific that might inspire and support some work in other counties. So I just want to put that idea out there because I had a wondering about it.
And Parsa, thank you for that recommendation. And if you recall, in my previous presentations of this framework, we talked about mentorships between the counties. And I think that hopefully there will still be that opportunity, even though this is no longer a formal process, but we do hope to be a catalyst and a connector of the counties. And I think that that opportunity also exists in the Oregon Juvenile Directors Department Association, where they meet on a regular basis and one thing that was requested of myself was my previous workshop from the OJDDA annual conference back in September. I was asked if it could be placed on their website as a resource. And of course, absolutely. And I think that there presents an opportunity to have some type of collective information sharing location, possibly on their website or maybe on the Youth Development Division's website. But I think that there's definitely the potential for that. And I hope that that is the case. In addition to some of the stronger, the counties who have more experience in racial and ethnic disparities work can, again, hopefully kind of work with their sister and brother organizations and counties to share about their learning, their mistakes, things that processes that they've had to improve or change. So that was the hope in that mentorship kind of framework idea. I'm looking at a comment here in the chat from Matt. And Matt, I think absolutely. I think, just mentioning something like that, exactly what you just shared in this comment could be placed in your submission, that your county's work is a work in progress. And these are some of the things that are actively happening real time and what your goals would be from the future. But I think just mentioning it is invaluable because that gives us insight into where you're currently at and where you hope to be in the future. And it gives us the opportunity to potentially offer any resources that we can help you with in your development and your county commissioner's development, and also potential collaborations, point you in the direction of, your sister or brother agencies who have done good work in DEI planning for their specific counties. So I think that if you're not there yet, that's okay. It's very good to know where you currently are and what you are planning to do. I think that is 100% acceptable in my opinion. Next slide, please. So this is basically the same breakdown of the scoring scale from last time, with the exception of adding the point system to each scoring category. And so at first I was like dividing it by 9 and trying to see what was kind of like an A, B, C, or D, and that didn't necessarily work. So I tried to come up with the most appropriate kind of scale range for each category. And we are definitely open to comment, suggestions, questions, scrapping and starting over. But for the exceptional category, proposing that the corresponding total points, again, there are 9 possible from the 3 components that have been shared with you, that a 9 is the only way to be exceptional. Satisfactory, which is still good and adequate, a 7 to 8 out of 9. Needs improvement, which is fair, a 5 to 6 out of 9. And unsatisfactory, which is insufficient, potentially even 0 to 4 out of 9. And again, if you can't evaluate the response, potentially that would even be in a non-applicable, but in essence, 0. So open to conversation about this recommendation.
Does anyone have any questions or thoughts about all of this? This was a lot of information, Sanji, and you've laid this out in a very easy to understand manner. So appreciate that, especially when there's so much to kind of review and take in. Anyone have any comments? I guess I have a question, and Anya, it kind of goes back. Well, actually, both Anya and Sanjay might have thoughts about this. I guess I'm wondering if the every county is required to submit a plan, and the plans need to be responsive to the questions that are answered, that are asked of the counties. I guess I'm just throwing this out here for the, I'm curious, why not have it just be a yes, it was responsive, or no, it was not responsive? I'm not trying to be overly simple, but I'm just curious about, you know, the obviously we'd love it if everybody could be exceptional, but we're on a journey. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about making it just a pass-fail type of moment.
Christina, we absolutely had that conversation. And, you know, I think that that's still a possibility. The thing is, human nature is that if you get no, everybody's going to want to know why it was no. So that's where it's kind of sticky about what quantifiers or objectiveness led to getting a no. I'm definitely open to yes or no. It would be a lot simpler, but you know, I just think that if someone gets an X instead of a check, they're going to want to know what led to the X. And maybe this could potentially be for the counties who don't get a check. You know, that's a potential idea, but we definitely had the conversation about yes or no as well. But personally, you know, I'm okay with either, but I think that if a county got no, that they would still be inquiring about why, and we would have to try to explain why.
Hey, Adrian, did you have a question or a comment?
Oh yeah, just the comment. I do like the format in which they've laid it out, because I think everyone is such in a different space and place when it comes to being on their DEI journey. I think having just a yes or no would really, I agree with Sanjay. They would probably want to know why, but then I think, you know, from what I'm hearing, and I'm really liking what I'm hearing, is that this team is looking at how they come alongside and equip these different counties to actually move forward. So I think this helps to give them an idea of where they're at, and then what are the different steps, the action steps that they can take to actually move forward on their DEI journey. So I do like the layout and what they're recommending at this point, for those reasons.
Thank you, Adrian. Brian Baird, did you have a comment?
Thank you very much, Adrian. And Brian, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I did. I just like to point out that, or for some thought to be considered additionally. So I'm a department of 5. So at the moment, I am the only one in the office. I'm covering court. I'm the grant writer. I'm the director. I'm a variety of those things. In my county, I feel like we've moved this needle and we have advocated for everything we can. I have personally for the last years and years and years. So for me personally, when I came back as a no, if I'm a no in my county, we need to just have my county fall in the ocean. Because I didn't necessarily feel a lot of support or guidance in what we didn't do. Or, I mean, I think we do pretty darn well, or just more guidance in how we need to report that back so we can actually get credit for what we provide. And in the same breath, I'll tell you, we can always improve. We can always do better. But I mean, for me personally, speaking only for Brian Baird from the Coos County Juvenile Department, it hurt my heart to feel like, you know, when this came back, that we're not doing what we can, when I feel like in our county, we are probably one of the most vocal advocates for changing this particular issue in the entire county. So, I mean, I just want you to hear that we don't, and I'm going to pick on Christina. I don't have a grant writing department. I'm it. I don't have the ability to go in and wordsmith and be able to spend, you know, full-time just to write this grant. I write this when I'm not doing other things. So my grant, frankly, is going to look very different than Multnomah County or Marion County or many of those. And so I would just ask that you guys additionally give us some additional support or some understanding as we do our best to do that. And I absolutely am going to attend the technical assistance and this good information. I want to know how we can move this forward. I would just appreciate some guidance on what we could do to improve that. That's my thought.
I think that's what this process is about. I don't have your plan in front of me. Are you comfortable sharing your rating or?
I know I'm one of the, my understanding was there are only 6 counties that passed. I've never received any feedback on what you didn't like in my county on my plan other than it didn't pass.
Okay, well, we can have this conversation one-on-one or as a group with you, but what I will share is that, and I'll be addressing that in the coming slides. So hopefully that will kind of give you more insight. But in the meet and greet initially, when this was going to be a requirement, one thing that we were going to do and still will do for the counties who choose to participate in the meet and greet is go over the comments that were associated with your submission for that component of the plan. And again, do what we're talking about. And I will wait until the next slide to kind of go into detail about those things. But I think that's the purpose of this process. In identifying a county that needs improvement, there's the opportunity to work with them to help them develop and curate those improvements. If you were unsatisfactory and you did not demonstrate knowledge of the subject matter, there's a tremendous opportunity to help you learn and provide information, knowledge, tools, and resources so that you are better adept in the subject matter. So I think absolutely that's what we want to do is help you. And, you know, Brian, I'm not sure if you were at any of the previous conversations about this. We said many times that this is not a one-size-fits-all process, that we know that each of these counties present unique demographics and dynamics, and we would take that into consideration in this process. And we, you know, the meet and greet is that opportunity for us to learn about your county dynamic and to help you to, you know, address this particular request for funds. I think ultimately, you know, we're public servants and we have to have a level of accountability for the funds of the state of Oregon that we disseminate to our colleagues and stakeholders. And so that, you know, we know that in the request and the distribution as statutorily given to us, we can show, you know, that we're not just giving away money for the heck of it, and that we have a record of, you know, the process that has been derived and how the counties plan to utilize these funds, because, you know, the funds have to be used for, you know, stated purposes. And so in the curation of this submission request, you know, I think all of those components were taken into consideration when developing the questions that we asked you all.
And I know you guys are doing your best, and I appreciate that. And I would have loved to have done this a year ago, so I could have done this and then put it in my plan and moved it forward. And I remember sitting in an ESD meeting when things went wild down here, and one of my local high schools made national news for racist stuff. I mean, and I was one of the instigators for that. I was one of them that helped the ACLU come in, and we started lawsuits, and then I took a step back because I couldn't be involved in that part. And then the other part of that for me is I want to throw out, when we talk about specifically the LGBTQ and the staffing component. So I'm a founding member of our local group. We just got them another $10,000 grant for housing closets and other stuff. But when we start talking about staff, I mean, I have 5 staff. So if I have a staff member who's not out, I don't know if I'm comfortable writing in my plan that I have staff members who identify in the LGBT community in a community of 63,000 with a staff of 5. I mean, I don't feel like it's my job to out them to pad in my department, I have individual so-and-so. I mean, that gives me a level of indigestion. I mean, I have a Hispanic individual who is Spanish speaking primary language. I mean, he doesn't mind me identifying that at all because he would identify that. But sexuality, if someone's not out, is something I'm not comfortable putting in a report just so that I can see I have LGBTQI plus staff.
Well, Brian, I'm speaking to the racial and ethnic disparities component of this, but I think that in your responses, you have to have those conversations in the level of comfortability, but it's all about the practices and the policies that are evidence-based and culturally appropriate. And so, you know, it's going to be your discretion to describe, not necessarily saying, you know, X staff is a part of the community, but you can say that potentially we have, you know, been informed on such and such evidence-based practices that are, what's the word that I'm looking for? Successful when working with LGBTQ plus youth. But I want to try to keep us on track for the presentation because, you know, I am allotted a certain amount of time, but that is a separate component and a little bit farther out from my purview of work. So, but I definitely hear what you're saying. And I think ultimately you have to use your discretion to be able to describe the appropriate evidence-based, culturally specific processes and practices based on what this field of work says would be useful in working with vulnerable youth. But Tanisha, if you could please go to the next slide. So with the upcoming meet and greets, the counties will receive an email this Friday about this entire process, which will include the resubmission criteria, letting them know to please respond if they are interested in technical assistance or just want to resubmit their plan. Most likely the communication about the JJS data training will be separate. We hope to get that out as soon as possible before Friday, as soon as we have that confirmation and needed information from our partners at JJS. So you all in the county juvenile departments will be receiving a very extensive communication from me, just kind of giving an overview and designing what is next, and basically asking each county to express if they are interested in receiving this technical assistance or if they would just like to resubmit their plan, excuse me. If counties are interested in participating in the meet and greets and the technical assistance process, there will be an opportunity to register for that. And the goal is to complete the meet and greets in the month of January 2022. Next slide, please. One component of the meet and greet will be to look at this form, which is something that was drafted in order to give counties insight into how their rating was derived. So I'm the evaluator. I will copy and paste your submission from the Juvenile Crime Prevention Plan for that question, description of cultural strategies, including addressing racial and ethnic disparities, identifying your data analysis and inclusion. The submitted response for that will be in this form, as well as your score, as well as my comments. And so this will be the opportunity for us to really kind of have a conversation about my evaluation of your plan submission for this section of the plan. Also, there were a couple of counties that some of the committee members expressed comments regarding this prompt, and I will share those as well. And I just want to get also your basically, Brian, what you just did, that would have been a perfect meet and greet conversation. And hope that we can still continue the conversation at a meet and greet. But basically to kind of express how your rating was derived and look over your response and your full plan to see if there were any references to this work in a different part of the plan and how those could have been placed in this section. So that is going to be one component of the meet and greet. Next slide, please. Additional components that will potentially happen in the meet and greet is learning more about your county juvenile department, sharing the importance of identifying and addressing racial and ethnic disparities work that the Youth Development Division is doing, discussing what your county juvenile department hopes to accomplish from this process, discussing any insights, questions, or concerns from the JJDP data training, providing an overview of the technical assistance process, reviewing the resubmission criteria, and scheduling the first meeting of the technical assistance. So again, hopefully this will kind of ease some of the angst and nerves and emotions that have been attached. And our apologies, my apology for the delay. There have been a lot of up and down, back and forth, hold, pauses. And I know putting myself in each of your positions and trying to be actively empathetic, I can understand how not knowing a lot of these pieces of information could be troubling to someone. So I do apologize that it has taken us so long to get here, but I hope that this moving forward, providing a little more insight will help the county kind of understand that this is not a punitive process, which we have said multiple times. It's an opportunity for growth, including for me and for the Youth Development Division. So any questions about this that I've shared? Next slide, please. That's it. So again, the next step will be the information for the JJDP training, which will happen on December 17th from 9:30 until 11. And then this Friday, you will receive an email providing a lot of this information that I've shared, resources, documents, and I will ask you all right now, would it be helpful, or do you think for the Juvenile Justice Committee, I should send that form out attached to the county so that they can see my comments ahead of the meet and greet, or would it be better to hold off to review those together at the meet and greet?
Well, Sanji, I think it would be, in my opinion, it would be better to go ahead and provide that to the county juvenile departments in advance of the meet and greet so that they have a chance to review their plan with the with your feedback for in their minds, and be looking for you know, the things that you noticed that could be improved on. I think that the feedback I've been getting from colleagues in the Juvenile Directors Association, it has been that people really want the feedback. So I think it would give people an opportunity to be more prepared and to, you know, I know if I were getting that, I'd be saying, wow, okay, so what parts of this did I, in my own tunnel vision, living in my, you know, I don't see the forest through the trees in my own neighborhood, did I miss? I would be saying that. And then I might be saying, well, hey, this part I don't agree with, and here's why. I think it's an opportunity for a really rich conversation between you representing the YDD and YDC and juvenile departments. So I would encourage sending it out ahead of time, but you know, I'd love to hear what other people think on the committee.
Thank you, Christina. And I see Jody is saying that that would be helpful, and Stacy is agreeing. Stacia, excuse me, is agreeing. Parsa, I see your hand also.
Yeah, I just wanted to build off of Christina's comment. I agree in that as much where we can be proactive and send out communications earlier, that also helps us with building a stronger relationship with the county juvenile departments and the directors and leads. And then I also want to reinforce that, you know, just reflecting on what we heard at our last meeting, that ongoing communication and dialogue is so crucial. And it's also a part of like what technical assistance could look like. And it helps us address any major questions or concerns people have ahead of time. So I'm excited that we can build on what we've learned over the last year and integrate that into our process moving forward. And hoping that with this updated process, we can continue to refine it based on feedback we hear to ensure that we're all really clear on our shared equity goals together. And that we're all kind of rowing in the same direction, right? But everyone's support looks a little different depending on where they are. So any way that we can help as a committee, want to also put that out there as well. And thank you, Sanji, for continuing to keep us up to date and making these refinements as well based on feedback we've heard.
Yeah.
Thank you, Parsa.
Anyone else have any thoughts about that? About whether they should be sent out ahead of time? No? Okay. So Sanji, do you have anything else? I know we need to wrap up, but any last thoughts or questions or requests of the group?
No, I think once we have identified which counties are interested in moving forward with the technical assistance process, and depending on the volume of that amount of work, I still think that some of the ideas, like I would still like to have the data walk next year, still in the process of drafting racial and ethnic disparities overview document. Still would like to, as Parsa pointed out, there's potential need to kind of do the possible mentorships. So in the last November meeting, I had a slide that was showing some opportunity for the Juvenile Justice Committee members to participate in this process. And even though this is no longer required, I still think that depending on the amount of counties who will be participating in the technical assistance, there's an opportunity for you all to be an integral part of this. And I definitely would like to lean on your expertise in certain or all instances of this process. So that's all that I have. Thank you. And
Great.
thank you all for your time and your participation. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Tanasia, for helping to navigate the slides.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think in the interest of time, we'll move on here to, thank you so much, Sanji. That was a real, oh, Anya, sorry, I didn't see your hand up there.
Oh, no worries. I just wanted to look back to the committee. I'm asking the committee members now. So the proposed guideline for resubmission of the plan, is that an acceptable direction that we're proposing as far as the committee goes? Should we go ahead and release that guideline for plans resubmission to those who will be asked to resubmit the plans? Or do we want to hold until the meet and greets are being held? Or if there are any additional changes that need to be made? So that's kind of loaded question, but in a short way, do we have your go ahead or no?
Anya, can you just clarify when you said wait until the meet and greets have happened? Are you saying to be able to have that dialogue between you know, the counties and Sanji and other YDD staff to
Right.
finalizing? Is that what you're?
Because a couple of things. So Sanjay will be sending an email to the juvenile department directors, describing the technical assistance process and asking for an opportunity to meet and greet with them. And also, prior to an individual meet and greet, she will be sharing the individual feedback, right? Because it seems that it's an overwhelming reaction that it would be helpful. So would it be helpful to send out the resubmission guidelines at the same time so people can see what is being asked to clarify? Or what's at which point do we release the guidelines? And when we release them, do they look okay to you as the committee? Do we get your approval for them? Or, what's your feedback? Good to go, we need to work some more. Let us see the guys send this to us in an email and we will provide our feedback in writing. What's the committee's preference here? Am I making any sense? Because the plans, the guidelines to resubmit the plan is a big important step in this process.
Would it be possible to just screen share the timeline one more time? I just want to make sure I get another look at it. Is that something that's feasible right now?
Sure. Tanisha, could you pull up the
Last meeting?
well, Parasa, which timeline? The one that Sanjay just shared with you, or the one that we had earlier?
I think we were talking about the timeline for resubmission. The one that Sanji was going over, but I can't recall on the slides exactly.
Tanisha, if you could go back to the same PowerPoint you were sharing today, please. And I know
I
that is up in 3 minutes.
The slide.
Sanjay, do you remember which slide it was on?
There was a discussion, Tanasia, move forward about 5 slides, please. I'm not sure if this is what you're referring to, Parsa, and to clarify with Anya and Christina, I think that, Christina, what Anya is saying is that, is it okay to share these aforementioned criteria with all the counties who receive provisional or conditional approval, so that regardless of if they choose technical assistance or not, these are what we are agreed upon by the Youth Development Council as the criteria that will get you a yes or no for your question 6 submission. And Parasa, to address your question, this is like I was sharing previously, sharing the email with just kind of a lot of information. I will try to make it as reader friendly as possible this Friday, and we'll ask the county juvenile departments to reply by next Friday if they are interested in participating in the technical assistance or if they would just like to resubmit their plan. And at that point, we will schedule the meet and greets for the counties who are interested in participating in the technical assistance. And I think we also need to develop, I think that's a conversation maybe at our next meeting, a time frame for the counties who choose only to resubmit their plan and when that will be. But for those who embark upon the technical assistance, again, we hope to have the meet and greet component of that complete by January of 2022.
I'm sorry. I think in the interest of time, it's 3 o'clock right now, and I don't think we have enough time to really vet which way to go. So I'm kind of wondering if we could, Anya, I think you suggested maybe sending things out on email for the committee to review. I know we have several members who couldn't be here today in terms of that criteria that was outlined in Sanji's PowerPoint. I'm thinking it might be good to send that, out, and at our January meeting, which is going to go by fast, that still gives time before we could revisit it in this group at our January meeting after people have a chance to review it more. And that still is really before all those meet and greets are going to happen. So that would be my suggestion to the group.
Okay. We'll do that. We will send an email with basically what was in the PowerPoint to the group with feedback, and we will finalize it at the next meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I just want to give a shout out to Sam Coe for being concerned about my driving record. I appreciate that support, Sam. So anyway, seriously, did we have anything before we adjourn, Anya or anyone from YDD?
No, I think we covered it all. Well, thank you so much for the committee members for being here, for our guests, to my colleagues, and Christina, you did an excellent job facilitating. Now, don't get a ticket.
Yeah, well, I'm no Molly, but I try to, keep the wheels on the bus. But anyway, thank you all for your time, and so good to see so many visitors joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Take care.